Welcome to the 27th week after Pentecost. It's Wednesday, November the 27th, 2024. And this is the Manna at the Tap podcast, where we actively seek the spiritual nourishment our souls crave. The daily lectionary reading we explore together is the manna designed to nurture our spiritual growth and provide the sustenance our souls need. I'm Gloria, your fellow traveler on this spiritual journey, and together we share insights and interpretations from these readings that enrich our spiritual lives. Today's lectionary reading is from John 16, in which Jesus gives his disciples an extended farewell discourse. Another name for a discourse is a dialogue between them. Jesus tried to explain the benefits of his departure and the impending coming of the Spirit. And the Spirit would offer them an abiding and enlightening presence. And the Spirit would replace Jesus's tangible presence, which they had experienced for the 3 years of his earthly ministry. He said after his departure, he described the Spirit as caring for and guiding the community to the truth. Although his departure was positive for the disciples and the community, the disciples were not convinced of it. Everything Jesus said to them confused and frightened them, and one can only imagine their disbelief as their eyes filled with tears. Jesus repeatedly told the disciples to find joy in what he said to them. He even used the example of a woman in pain as she gave birth to her child, but when her baby was born, the woman forgot the anguish because of her joy that a child was born into the world. But that didn't help, and they continued to grieve. He told them that they would see him again, and at that time they would rejoice, and no one would be able to take that joy away. But they continued to be sad because they were about to lose their teacher, leader, and friend. The lectionary reading centers on verses 25 to 33 of John's chapter 16. Jesus had taught his disciples in parables because he knew they would be unable to understand or make sense of all he was saying until after his death and resurrection. But now he has decided to stop speaking that way and will talk to them in plain and direct language. He lets the disciples know that his Father loved them because they loved him and they believed that he came from the Father and was leaving the world and returning to the Father. Well, these words encouraged the disciples who thanked him for speaking so clearly. But there was more to come. Jesus warned them that hardship and persecution would come, and it had already begun. The disciples would be scattered, leaving Jesus alone and returning to their homes. The disciples did not see it coming, that they would desert Jesus in his moment of greatest need. But he told them he wouldn't be alone because his Father would be with him. They were confident there was no longer a need to ask questions, and they understood all that Jesus had said. But Jesus knew it was not that simple. The disciples needed to learn to have a relationship with the Father and the promised Spirit. It would take time for them to grow in their relationship with the Father. And this would only be possible through Jesus because no one knows the Father except Jesus reveals him. We need the Spirit to disclose the things of Christ to us. And here we have a picture of the divine family, the triune Godhead. We have the Father, we have Christ, and we have the Spirit. Jesus knew the disciples were still confused and would fail spiritually before the night ended. But he promised them hope for their spiritual growth. By introducing them to the Father, they would now be able to have access and come to the Father in Jesus' name. The Father loved them because they loved his Son. After Jesus' death and resurrection, he would return to the Father, thereby completing the plan of salvation that began with the triune God before the foundation of the world. What the disciples needed most of all before they went out into the uncertainty of the night was peace. Jesus promised them that in him they would have peace. The world offered them tribulations, but they were to take courage. Jesus had overcome the world. The disciples abandoned Jesus that night. They thought it would be easy to believe, but they failed to recognize their shortcomings and failures waiting to happen outside the upper room that night. But it was not a surprise to Jesus. He had prayed for them and he had assured them of his Father's love for them and gave them his peace that would have them overcome. Well, let me just give you a couple of moments to reflect on what you've heard. The disciples were not always faithful, even if they said they believed who Jesus was. They struggled just like we struggle. They had doubts and fears like we do when we can't understand what is ahead and it is dark. But be assured, the disciples had real faith, even though it was shaky faith. And when we fail, Jesus does not condemn or abandon us. Faith takes time to grow and mature. Jesus speaks to us, telling us to take heart. The old liturgical year is behind us. We can be an overcomer in this new liturgical year that is ahead because the Father loves us, the Son redeemed us, and the Spirit is ready and willing to lead and guide us if we will be obedient.